The hardest part about that is that they believe in my philosophy, they believe in what I'm doing, but they have families, they have real jobs. So it's like their commitment is like, okay, I can give you 2 hours on Saturday, every other Saturday, or this or that, or the kids get sick, or there's a lot of things that come up. So the consistency is really hard, and trying to manage that is actually, it's really quite difficult when you're looking at it at this scale. Even with you're looking at the people who are advising you. So whether you're talking about strategists or communication, the lawyers, finance, they have filers. Like this was like a kind of like, I wasted about 3 days on this, but basically I was trying to figure out who's going to file my FEC filings and everything. And I was like getting close to a deadline. And I remember being like, I was like arguing with my lawyer, because like usually lawyers handle all the paperwork, and she was like, no, I don't do that. I don't know who does that. And I was like, well, and then I asked my finance guy, and he's like, I don't do it. He's like, I just put the numbers together. I'm like, who does the filing? There's actually a filer. And so I ended up finding, through my communications guy, found a filer that didn't, that wasn't conflicted, because a lot of times, like communications person, lawyers, etc., a lot of these guys, they're either working for one party or the other, so they actually have clauses that they can't work for somebody that's not a Democrat or not a Republican. And so that was one of the hardest things, was actually trying to find people that could work with me. And so my lawyer was doing elections law for 6 years, worked with one of the top election lawyers in DC who I met, was a friend of a friend. And I met with him. He's like, I can't work with you. We're working with some guys in Michigan already. We're conflicted out. And I was like, okay. He's like, but this girl who worked for me for 6 years, she does philanthropy work. And it's like, she said she'll take you on. So the girl that works that does all my election, like legal stuff, she does philanthropies. So it's like trying to figure out how to like navigate all this is one of the hardest. The other thing, and Cooper kind of he mentioned it, but basically is the signatures. As independents for Congress, you already heard his hurdle. Ours was 3,000 compared to, if you're one of the parties, it's only 1,000. And and I was advised by a GOP lawyer friend of mine that if you're running as an independent, he's like, make sure you get at least 50% more. He's like, if you don't have 50% more, he's like, I can guarantee they'll spend $250,000 to $500,000 to challenge you. And so, like, I turned in, we collected 5,200 after we cleaned them up and everything for stuff you couldn't, like a lot of chicken scratch and stuff like that. After we cleaned up, we submitted like 4,400, and we needed 3,000. So it was almost 50%, and we didn't get to contest it. So, but those are definitely the big hurdles.
Cooper, what about you? What's some of the challenges you face running as an independent and running against a two-party system?
Yeah, so as you'd expect, just sort of the resources, the networks, the lack of infrastructure is an obvious challenge. But the biggest one, I think, and something that isn't really talked about as much, is like the psychological impediment to something like this. Because what you're running up against when you're out in the public is fear. And I at least feel good about what I'm doing. I mean, as an independent, I get to say exactly what I want to say. I have some things to say. I plan on doing it if they let me into a debate. But I wonder at times whether or not we need people on the insides of both parties, bringing them back to the middle. Because when I'm out there talking to people, you hear the same things from people on both sides. Like, oh, like you're gonna help the Republican win. Oh, you're gonna help the Democrat win. And so you kind of know you're onto something when people are saying the same exact thing. But the thing is that that's not an argument. You know, there's no facts or reason to that. It's just this pure tribal fear. So really breaking through that is tough, especially if you're approaching a group. Because that's an interesting thing. It's not just the individual psychology of talking to people, but like when you talk to a group, what the first person does matters. Because everybody else will probably just follow them. So if you have somebody that puts up their guard or they get aggressive, you're going to get stomped. So it's really tough to try and convince people that, you know what, you're better off voting for somebody that's actually going to serve you, because you know, Machiavelli said people are really moved by fear and like hatred. It's really tough to crack. So it's really cool to see what you guys in this group are doing, because I think that's like those type of conversations are, you know, if anything can save us, it's going to have to be that, I think.
Awesome, thank you. Chris, a little different question, because you kind of already went over some of the difficulties you faced. For Attorney General specifically, I know Dana Nessel, she's running on the Democratic side. She said a couple weeks ago there's some laws, she'll pick and choose which laws to enforce and which ones not to enforce. So are you willing to aggressively defend statutes and policies that you may not even agree with? Is that part of your platform?
Yeah, it's called being a lawyer. I mean, So I'm running as a nonpartisan. And what I'm running, and what I tell everyone that I come into contact with, because I run into a lot of the arguments that Cooper just articulated, like, oh, you're going to win for one person or the other. And my argument is, listen, I don't care who you're voting for governor, or who you're voting for legislator. Whatever what side of the aisle you lean towards, go vote for Bill Schuette or Gretchen Whitmer. Go vote for whatever legislator. Because they're the ones who actually make the policy. That's where policy is made and implemented. Then you go to, but who's going to enforce it? How about just the even-handed guy in the middle? Who's not, and what I tell folks is, listen, I guarantee in the 4 years that I would be Attorney General, you will disagree with me at some point. But what I can tell you about it is this. You'll never question whether I'm actually doing it to help one party or the other, which I can't say if you elect the Republican or the Democrat. You know, so you might disagree with me, but you'll know it's because we just have a disagreement on the law. My other thing is, I am not the rule of one. This is one of the problems with our system right now, and I think Ben Sass kind of mentioned this in the hearings over the last week. The legislators have become so worried about being reelected, they've pushed all of the really tough questions to these other people. So on the federal level, it's the Supreme Court. And that's why the Supreme Court's become this death match. Because the legislature doesn't want to, the Congress doesn't really want to do its job. In Michigan, they push it all to the Attorney General. Well, give it to the Attorney General. What's your opinion, Attorney General? You know what I would do? I'd push it right back. I don't care. Like, I'll give you the opinions that need to be done, but this is not the rule of one. And so people ask me all the time about, well, what do you think about gun control? What do you think about abortion? I'll tell you, but I'll also tell you this. I follow the law. If it's not the law, it doesn't matter what Chris Graveline thinks. We follow the law. And so I've been a prosecutor for 20 years. I've had to defend laws and sentences that I disagreed with. But my position has always been, until I get so upset that I'm willing to quit my job and go be a legislator, that's not my job. I didn't write this law. I just have to uphold it. And so that's my position, and absolutely, you defend the laws. If you don't want to do that job, then don't run for Attorney General.
Very good. Does anybody have any questions? Let's bring it out to the audience. Does anybody have any diehard questions that they're really wanting to ask? It's Colin.
I have a question for Mr. Graveline. As somebody who's involved with the law, what is your thoughts on something that's supposed to be this nonpartisan, as like the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh, and how the parties are kind of making this into a more partisan issue, and how this is affecting the legal system?
Well, I mean, this has been the problem for the last 30 years. The parties, it's all become a game to them. Who's up, who's down, who's going to game the system to get the last one. And I think right now you'll hear from the Republicans, well, it's the Democrats who started with Bork. Okay, but let's face it. You know, with Merrick Garland, the Republicans played a game to get to where they wanted to be. And so it's all become this big game. And the reason the Supreme Court's that way is just like I mentioned. Congress has given all the responsibility over to them. I mean, I'd be in favor of term limits for Supreme Court justices, like 20 years. And because that insulates them from political, you know, the winds of politics. And it would also have the effect of maybe the presidents wouldn't put up 45-year-old people. And I'm talking as a 45-year-old. I'm here to tell you, I am not the right person to put up for a Supreme Court justice. You haven't seen all the various things, all the various cases that can come in front of you. And so maybe we would actually get our most senior and wisest judges to actually be on the Supreme Court. Wouldn't that be nice? You know, and so you got to stop the game playing. And guess what? President Obama said it. Elections matter, and you know, and they absolutely do. And so if you're on the losing side and they put up a Supreme Court nominee, as long as that person has the right character and the right skill set, then you should be voting for them. You shouldn't be worried about, well, you know, should I be opposing them because of some game plan? That's my thought.
Absolutely. Does anybody have a question for the congressional candidates as well? Yes.
So what do you guys think about potential of a balanced budget amendment?
Yeah, did you pick up my?
Jeremy, you want to take?
Yeah, I mean, did you pick up my platform up front? It's in there. We definitely need that. At least, I mean, an amendment might be be difficult to get Congress to do.
Or at least legislation.
Exactly. I'm open to either. We absolutely need that because, I mean, fiscal responsibility isn't exactly the sexiest thing to talk about, but it's really important, especially for our generation. I mean, it's going to affect interest rates. It's going to affect the whole economy. I mean, it's something we really need to control.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's extremely important aspect. I'm a fiscal conservative myself. I've been in finance for over 20 years, work in different areas. But basically, it's one of the most important things is being able to balance it. I mean, it should, everything should equal out. You shouldn't have situations where they decide to give a tax cut that blows a monster hole in the debt ceiling, and then one of the biggest spending bills of all time. I mean, there's nobody driving this economic ship in the United States. I mean, it's nobody. Neither party can say like, oh well, we're fiscally responsible. Neither party can claim that, and it's one of the big motivations that I actually had to get into this, because nobody's steering this ship. And I look at it from perspective. I was doing a lot of business with China, and it's like you look, they're holding 1.3, 1.4 trillion dollars of debt. That we're going to be selling more debt. How are we financing this? 2019, we're going to have $1 trillion deficit. I mean, like, yeah, okay, give me a credit card where I can take out $1 trillion when the economy's fired on all cylinders. It doesn't make any sense. And all of you guys, it should scare you. Like this it's something that's, there will come a day of reckoning unless they keep pushing it down, because either they're going to pump out dollars, which will create a lot of inflation, or they have to figure out something else. But we definitely need something that fixes this and gets us to actually be fiscally responsible again.
Anybody else have a question for the moment? Yes, Jan.
All right, so I'm Deacon, and I'm a supporter of PETA. And I emailed, and this is like towards Jeremy Peruski, okay. And I emailed Representative Paul Mitchell about it.
When it comes to issues like this, whether you're talking about slaughterhouses, farms, there's a lot of different areas that you can go. It's not just one animal or another, but there's a lot of different areas. And I just look at it kind of, this specifically, we're talking about food production. And so, but I believe in transparency, and I think that from my perspective, the fact that people can get arrested for secretly filming in barns and stuff like that, I find it kind of crazy. Like, if you're going to be producing food, show people that it's clean, it's safe. This isn't asking too much. And so, from that perspective, I do believe, and this applies to a lot of areas, not just farming or anything like that, but I believe in transparency more than anything. And I think because when you shine light on something, it's like all of a sudden people will be like, okay, wait, I can agree with that or I can't agree with it. Things got to get fixed. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question for the moment? Yes, Mark.
So for all independents, it's very clear there's a stigma around the idea of a wasted vote. How have you been fighting that?
Cooper, take that first.
I always, that's my standard answer. What's your vote doing for you now? Like, I don't care. Like, say, I don't know who's this. I think you have a Republican here now for Congress, right? If it goes Democrat, you're going to send them to Congress, and what's going to happen? They're still going to do nothing. It's still gridlock. I mean, you get to feel good about your home district representing you better, but that's purely your own, emotions. It makes you feel good, but look at the country. It's not going to help it. So.
Yeah, from my perspective, what I say, because that is the biggest hurdle that as independents, because if you look traditionally, like historically, you have the Ross Perot's, you have the Greens, the Libertarians. They're very ideologically driven, right? And usually when you hear that, I mean, even Bernie Sanders is a good example, right? So they're ideologically driven and they're out kind of like on the periphery of whatever mainstream parties are. But what we see today, the parties have become, I mean, look, again, just turn on your TV and watch like all this crazy stuff going on with Kavanaugh and all that. I mean, they've become the crazies on the extremes now. And so again, getting back to that middle, and I'll just kind of echo what Cooper just said, is one of the things that I say to people, I was like, voting for the same two parties that have gotten us in this situation isn't going to help us fix it. They are accountable. If you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're accountable to party leadership, or you're not getting any money, or any support, or any committees, or anything like that. If you don't listen to what the special interests are, they're not going to. They're giving you money. It all comes with strings. I mean, everything. I mean, even endorsements. I talk to people. I had a sister who had Down syndrome, and they're like, well, what if Special Olympic? Like some guy was just being a bit aggressive with me. And he's like, well, what if Special Olympics comes and they want to endorse you? I'm like, I would say thank you, but no. Like I don't want to, even something like that might be as innocuous as Special Olympics, but it still comes with strings. And so from my perspective, I truly believe get the voice back to the people, but it's one of the issues that people have to hear, that when people hear that they're not, that it isn't a wasted vote, they're like, wait a minute, this guy actually wants to represent us. Then it's a different story. The hard part about it is getting that message out. Because right now, it gets back, I mean, Chris, like, we were talking about this, that sort of fear of like, oh, well, I haven't done that before. You know, it's something new. It's it's taking people outside of their comfort zone. But right now, people, if ever they've been apt to be outside of their comfort zone, people are just so tired. I mean, I went to 3 senior fairs back in August, and each one I met between 180 and 200 people, maybe a little bit more. I probably had a half a dozen people that said, no, thank you, I'm a Democrat. No, thank you, I'm a Republican. Outside of that, everyone's like, yes, we need something that's different. People are hungry for it, but they just got to hear about it. They have to hear about it, and they have to kind of verify that you're not crazy. But again, it gets back to the point where the parties have gone to extremes, and all the independents are in the middle now. So,
Chris?
And I actually get kind of lucky on this one, because the position I'm running for is the top law enforcement officer and the top lawyer of the state. So my pitch is, why do you want a partisan? You shouldn't want a partisan in that office. And look what the parties have started to do with this office. So I actually, that's the basis of my candidacy, is this office should be nonpartisan to begin with. And I think a lot of people are very receptive to that. The difficulty I'm running into is, if you read any newspaper articles about me, is I'm the Democratic spoiler. I'm the one who's only going to take votes away from the Democrat. And the reason for that was my initial endorsement in this campaign was from the former U.S. Attorney under Barack Obama, Barb McQuade, endorsed my candidacy. So it's viewed in the Detroit media as I've been asked point blank, has the UAW recruited me? And because they were backing the other person at the Democratic convention, not Dana Nessel. And or did Barb McQuade recruit me to run as a moderate Democrat? And the answer to both of those are no. The benefit for me is I believe I can take votes from the Republican side as well. I'm from mid-Michigan. I'm married into a farm family. I'm married into a dairy family. And I'm a U.S. Army vet, the only veteran running. That usually goes pretty well in Republican districts. And so that's what I respond. And the response is, this position I'm running for should be nonpartisan, and I think at least assists me in making that argument. So.
Absolutely. Devin, your question?
Yeah, so on the issue of endorsements, to specifically Mr. Graveline and Mr. Nye, are there any endorsements that, should you receive them, you would not accept? And to Mr. Peruski, it's a sort of differently phrased question, are there any endorsements that you would?
I've taken the same position as Jeremy on this, is I am not I'm not seeking and will not accept any issue advocacy PAC endorsements. Or I'm not interested in that, because I agree that once you take that, and it doesn't matter, it can be the most benign thing, you're going to automatically get either strings attached or painted one way or the other. Endorsements I would take, once again for the position I'm running for, I think sheriffs. County sheriffs. I will say this, most elected officials out there are not sticking their neck out for an independent. No way, no how, because they got to run their next time. The one exception to that rule, sheriffs, especially sheriffs in northern Michigan, who don't necessarily feel real tied to the party that they're running with anyway, and they tend to be the top vote getter in those counties. So yes, I will take those. So.
Yeah, I'm not seeking endorsements as a part of my strategy.
From my perspective, I can't really think of anything, because I've had situations where the conversation, where I've had the conversation, but I can't say that there's anything that I really would. I really do look at it from the perspective, there are strings attached to all of this. I understand your perspective, definitely. I mean, that's where you're helping. But from a congressional perspective, there's always going to be strings attached to it. So I'd probably say no.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, Alex.
Hi, my question is actually for you, Mr. Peruski. I'm from the 10th district.
Okay.
I'm kind of wondering what's your like major plan, maybe education-wise, because I know we've struggled, like not necessarily in my area. I'm from the Shelby Township area, but you know, north of that into like Romeo, Elmont areas. Like, what is your education stance?
So education, there's a couple of big issues. First of all, I'm not an education expert. I'm a finance guy.
Oh yeah.
But my sister is a principal, and some of my closest advisors they're either administrators or teachers in the area. I actually was just meeting this morning. I was just meeting with Jamie Kane, who's the superintendent for all the Port Huron schools, which is one of the largest school districts in Michigan. What I would say, there's a couple of things. One is that teaching to the test, if we're looking at K through 12, has got to stop. This is like, it's one of the craziest things that I've ever, again, I'm learning a lot of this, but it's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. It makes absolutely no sense. Our district, we have 23% of the people in our district have a college education, but yet we're telling everybody from 9th through 12th grade they have to practice for the test or take the test to go to college. That A, it's a waste of money, and B, it's like you're telling all these kids that don't go to college, that other 77%, that they're failures, and it's ridiculous. We have such a shortage of skilled labor right now in our area. It's unbelievable. You can't find welders, you can't find carpenters, you can't find electricians. I mean, across the board. And these are jobs that pay $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to an 18-year-old coming out of school with no debt. I mean, I look at that and I'm just like, again, it's one of these things where I'm like, who's steering the ship? Like, what's going on here? Like, the most basic, it's clear as day. But when you start bringing in the union reps, when you start bringing in, you know, the charter schools and all these different people that have different agendas, all of a sudden now you start seeing why none of this makes sense. And so that would be one of them. Two is like basically like anything like vocational training. Like right now there's still Croslex, which you probably know where Croswell is, Lexington.
Yeah.
So they're just perfect example. Like they shut down their vocational training wing of the school last year, and I'm just like, this is the exact opposite of what we need. And so and they realize that, and the teachers there realize it, but they're like, we're being paid by the state, you know, to push this agenda. Like you have certain criteria you have to meet.
Yeah.
And so they have to push it. They don't have a choice. And so looking at it from that perspective, that's got to change. It just doesn't make any sense. Two, one that I actually talk about a lot, and I won't say never, but you rarely see this discussed, is like teaching emotional intelligence. Because you're seeing a record level, I mean, you start with the most obvious is gun violence, right? So you've seen like in the last 10, 15 years, so much has changed when it comes to that. It's all mental health stuff. Highest levels of teen suicides, teen depression, opioid addiction, all these areas, these are all mental health issues that a lot of it, we're seeing a lot of testing that's actually done in schools where kids can, you know, you teach them emotional intelligence, they can actually help themselves. You got to give them the tools though and help them understand. When it comes to shifting a little bit to college and everything like that, school debt, college debt, has got to be a huge issue. That's got to be grappled with. And one of I look at these areas again as an independent. I'm not setting like monster policies. We're going to change how America works, but looking at what we can do. One of the most basic things is that if you declare bankruptcy, it should be like any other debt. You know, I believe in redemption and second chances and all that. The fact that you declare bankruptcy, you can't wash off $100,000 of college loans or $20,000. It doesn't matter how much it is. It doesn't. Again, it's another thing. It doesn't make sense. It's like there are so many people drowning. We got $1.5 trillion of college loan debt, and I'm sure like a lot of you guys are grappling with this. We can't keep going this way. We can't. And so those would be the three big things that I'd focus on.
Thank you.
Cooper, kind of going on the same line of that, the congressional seat. What's your kind of K-12 plan? You know, in regards to education, what would you like to see happen? What kind of policies would you like to implement to kind of change the system as it is now?
Sure, yeah. So the principle I mentioned earlier about trying to look to motivations, whether that's you know, individuals or organizations or systems, gives me a principle, at least I apply it to most issues, which is devolution, or you know, solving problems at the proper level of authority. So for me, I want to see education and transportation, for that matter, addressed by state and local authorities, because I think it's at those levels that, one, people know what's best for themselves. They understand their communities, they understand their kids, their needs, their resources, all the circumstances that people in DC don't. And they're also going to have the right motivations to do it the right way. because of bureaucrat DC, they care about the country and all that, but it's ultimately getting a job done, spending the resources Congress has given them, and all of these other motivations, as opposed to people in the community or teachers or just the different stakeholders involved that not only want to get things adequately funded, but do things in a way that's conducive to the flourishing of like the community itself. So for the most part, I dodge on that. I want to see it come back down to the state and local. However, there are certain things at the federal level now I would like to see scrapped, like the Every Student Succeeds Act right now, because that's something that imposes mandatory testing on our students and actually imposes fees on our schools if they don't administer it, which I think is just bananas.
Thank you. I want to get Chris in here for one sec. How do you plan to balance your role as the chief law enforcement officer of the state along with your role as chief legal representative of the state? You covered it a little bit, but if you can kind of cover it.
Well, I mean, what the Attorney General's office is it's twofold. So in most law offices or prosecutors' offices around the state, all you have to worry about is prosecuting crime. In this particular office, you also have to worry about what the Attorney General's office does is defend the state from lawsuit. And so it's a bifold thing, and you can't ignore one without the other. That's one of my arguments in terms of why I'm running as well. So if you take a look at the two people I'm running against, primarily the Democrat and the Republican, they don't have a lot of experience doing actually managing people and running things. The Attorney General runs a 500-person office, 300 attorneys. The fact that I'm speaking in front of the conservative group, club, I'm guessing that most of you are with the Republicans. Tom Leonard has never run anything like that before, and his experience in court has been 9 misdemeanors and 1 felony trial. And now he's going to run a 500-person law firm, the biggest law firm in the state. That's what we're running for. And so that's what I'm asking people to consider is, before you cast your vote, take a look at our backgrounds, and then make your decision based upon who has the most experience and capacity to actually do this particular job.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
I just had it written down on my phone, but with the recent developments with the Catholic confirmation, do you now believe a precedent has been set that certain groups of people are not entitled to a presumption of innocence in due process?
I'll let you take that.
I'm glad that we actually at the Congressional we didn't have to deal with that. But I think just looking at it, I'll take a little bit of like a higher perspective of it. Is I just think it's turned into a circus. I think that everything that's going on here, you believe, you don't believe. I don't have access to all the facts or anything. What I do feel is that basically the attacks on him, the reactions from him, all of it is turned into a huge circus. And we're talking about Supreme Court justice who, it's the law of the land, and it's like lifetime appointment. We should be setting the highest bar for this. I mean, my personal perspective, I'm like, this should be the highest bar that we have for almost anything. You're giving somebody a job for the rest of their life that's going to be setting the law for our entire country. It's pretty serious. So it's kind of, I guess that would be my answer.
I mean, to be honest, I think truth comes out in the adversarial process. I'm here to tell you, having done hundreds of trials, good cross-examination and good questioning help, bring truth to light. I ask anyone to go back and take a look at those tapes and ask if either side was interested in gathering the facts last week, or were they advocating their particular party position. If you can tell me that anyone was actually trying to gather facts last week, I would take a different opinion of that. And so, no, people are presumed innocent. At the same time, the hearing last week wasn't a criminal trial. I mean, but it was to try to get to the facts, and nobody was trying to do that. And so that was the biggest issue with what occurred last week, was under the pretense of we're fact-finding, just take a look at how senators question. It's very interesting because, I got my experience because when I was in the Army, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this here, but during the Iraq War, a whole bunch of our soldiers abused people at the Abu Ghraib prison. and it became a huge thing and went in front of Congress, and I got to attend congressional hearings. So each Congress person, each senator gets 5 minutes to ask questions. Most of their questions took 4.5 minutes, and then was a comma with correct, and that's what the witness was supposed to say. Like, which part of that 4.5 minute speech did you want me to agree or disagree with? I mean, it's not fact-finding, and so that's the big issue with those types of hearings.
Cooper, any answer, or we want to move on?
Yeah, I mean, my starting point on that was just the media coverage, because I don't know how anybody here felt about it, but absolutely nobody, none of the people on TV seemed to say what I was feeling, which is that last week was just one of the saddest I've seen in our country, I think, since 9/11. It was deeply disturbing to me, and yeah, I think you can say both sides are bad here, but in this case, I was really angry with how the Democrats did that. I don't think that any of that was done in good faith. I think the timing of it all, whether it's the timing of the Senate releasing it, or there's just a lot in it that's just highly questionable to me, and so I find it difficult to believe that people, the Democrats are really trying to protect and care for this woman, because she seems to be used.
Any questions? Yes.
So I've already spoken to Senator Rick Schneider, and now we're more for the Senate candidate about this. I want to get the independent perspective. So when I was in high school, as part of this engineering group, we went to competitions, and my area was very wealthy. We could afford to use better parts and better tools when we went to competition, and thus our robot did better. But what I also saw was kids from impoverished areas didn't come with the same opportunity, because they used cardboard or wood, and thus they were discouraged from pursuing STEM education, which I feel would have been a good way out of poverty, because it is one of the highest paying fields out there. So I feel like that encourages a disparity where people in poverty are kept in poverty by that. So how would your position be to fix something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really critical area that we need to ensure there's equal opportunity and access to that type, as well as just, I think, another increasing disparity that's, I mean, you probably know this is the rural areas, just between, this sort of high-tech, high-paying wages that are not really accessible to people without college education. So I think those are definitely two major problems that we need to address and ensure that people can, have an opportunity in this 21st century economy. But for me, in my federal level race, at this stage, I don't see any role, really. I want to see that mostly done, again, state, local level, and also just philanthropy, social groups, different the nonprofit sector. And I would even call on businesses, to really step up and do some good for our communities, because they get away with a lot of these big companies, and I think at a time of just dysfunction and gridlock, it's a really good way to give back. Domino's things with the potholes, it's pretty cool. That's something that affects communities everywhere, especially ours. So I don't know. I would encourage and pressure companies to get more involved, because those could be future workers. Let's find a way to creatively invest in our workforce.
One thing I would add to that, because you bring up a good point. You're talking actually. This is like way advanced in comparison, like some of the basic stuff is. My district is, from an area perspective, it's 2/3 rural. Population is mostly down Macomb County, but the rest of it goes all the way to the top of the thumb, and it's quite rural. One of my key things that I talk about is the digital divide that we have. I can't stress to you how big it is, and I'll use myself as a perfect example. It's my job that I've had for the last 10 years. I could live anywhere in the world and do it. I just need my computer and I need a cell phone. As long as I have stable broadband, I can literally do it anywhere in the world. I had times where I'd go home and every year I'd come home and I'd spend every July and every December back home with my folks. And they had HughesNet. I don't know if you guys know HughesNet, like the satellite broadband. It's like dial-up. I mean, it's the fact that they changed the legal definition of broadband and lowered it, the threshold, is just, again, it's one of these things where we're moving backwards, which is crazy. But that's another story. But basically, talking about when you get out in the rural area, this digital divide is real. It's huge. I can't, like, with me, I would be home. I'd have to be working. It'd be like I'd be working if I'm working on something with China or Japan. I'd have to drive into Sandusky, which is about a 20-minute drive, sit outside of McDonald's, which is closed at 11, because it's 11 o'clock at night, it's like 11 a.m. over there, and I'd be sitting outside McDonald's in my car on my laptop, like basically riding on their Wi-Fi, because it was the only stable broadband in the area.
That's what I'm talking about. McDonald's involved here, you know?
It's ridiculous. So the issue, I see exactly what you're talking about. What you're talking about, like with students and stuff like that, which is awesome, and I agree 100%. We need that. But I'm looking at just even like the basic level of broadband, because broadband is as essential as electricity now. And so it's a huge area. Like, and when I talk to people in my district, you guys are all here, so you understand. You have access to broadband, so you know when your cell phone's not working or you got like slow dial-up, like slow connection. Everyone's like, come on, you know, right? But you have a situation where when you're out in the countryside, a lot of these people don't know that. You don't know what you don't know. So if you haven't had exposure to that, you don't know what you're missing. But you hear them complain about, you know, the kids are leaving, like nobody ever comes home. They go to college and they go to Chicago, or they go to Detroit, or they go to New York, or they go somewhere else. They can't come home. And so if you have broadband, right there, it's addressing, you're going right at the heart of what you're talking about, is you're giving access not only to the kids to be able to do stuff like the robotic competitions and all that, but you're enabling all of these people to actually start to bring back their families, because a computer programmer can sit anywhere in the world and do programming. I have friends who literally, you know, they're doing it in their houses all the time, or coffee shops, but and be making $150,000 that you're paying taxes to Michigan. You know, I mean, it's a great solution, but nobody has the political will to do it right now. And so, but then also, like one other thing that Cooper said that I agree 100% with is the public to private partnerships. Like in Port Huron, there's actually a couple of them. This one guy, Phil Peloso, he actually sponsors 10 different schools. He has this company called Triton Automation. They do robotics. So he sponsors different schools to try and give it. He's trying to find like different leaders in all these different areas to be able to do that. And that sort of partnership, he raises money to some like fundraising and stuff like that to be able to bring that to the kids. But at the federal level, I look at it from the perspective is when you see ideas like this, and there's like, it could be this, it could be homelessness, it could be other social issues that we're grappling with, where you see people having good success stories. How do we give it fire? You know, how do we like they've already created the spark. Let's just give it a little bit more and let them like look, because all of a sudden he could be representing 30 or 40 schools if he just had a little bit more money, because it doesn't take a lot to do it. But there's a lot of, the answers are already there. It takes the political willpower and excluding the special interests to be able to get to a solution.
Chris, does it really pertain to the Attorney General's seat? No.
Not at all.
This is a question directed at Mr. Peruski tonight. Going back to education and positive education, what would be your positions on something like adjusting school start times? Just as something
Are you talking about like for your class tomorrow morning, or sorry? But can you be more? Are you talking about K through 12?
Like, rearranging it so school start times are more in line with like the biological clock, where the younger kids tend to rise earlier, and as kids get older, that clock moves back. So you can see that there's a bunch of studies on how kids who get less sleep have some issues of substance abuse, mental health issues, it lowers their performance in athletics, it lowers their academic performance from ACT, SAT scores, to overall GPA. It's an issue that's contested by people who say that communities can't properly adjust, but I would think interested to see what.
Yeah, I'm too bitter about it. I had to wake up at 6 a.m. They're getting up too.
I grew up on a dairy farm, so I was up at 4:30. So I quite honestly, that's more of a state issue. Like a lot of like the K through 12 stuff, that's going to be a little bit dictated more by the state and state legislation, and them kind of trying to figure out what best practices are. And that's one of the things is like you look at just education in general, is like the system and the processes that we have been around for decades. They haven't evolved at all. So looking at solutions like this, or looking at STEM training and stuff, there are some really great solutions out there. But it's trying to figure out, and this is one of the points that I make on my website and my education video that I put out, was basically looking at some of the best practices that are out there. The Chan Zuckerberg initiative out in California, like they're actually discovering like how do you learn? You kind of learn, you change how you learn. Obviously, everyone learns differently. But how do we take these best practices and be able to implement that with a lot of people? But that's going to be a little more state-centric.
Yeah, in seriousness, though, I think what were those like writing exams we had in high school? You know, you pick a position, you have to argue it. Pretty sure I argued in favor of that then, but you know, I see it as a state issue, and I mean, I think it's interesting. I've seen the research too. I think it's totally a fact, but it's low on my agenda. I think that because ultimately, like, politics is all about information flows. And to get enough people interested in that means overpowering, you know, what the broadcast networks and the social media is broadcasting at them, blasting them. You're just not going to get the interest. So, I mean, even if it is factually, you know, correct and a good idea, I don't think it's feasible from that basis.
Mr. Graveline, question for you. In regards to the Attorney General position, there's been a lot of debate from the two candidates for governor right now, Bill Schuette and Gretchen Whitmer, former Attorney General, current Attorney General, and then she was a prosecutor, Ingham County prosecutor, I think. In regards to things that have been happening in Michigan State, with regards to the Larry Nassar investigation, it went through the Attorney General's office, went through the Ingham County, I guess, judicial system. You as Attorney General, what different steps would you take, or in a case like that, where something quite prevalent in 2018 could happen in another college around the country or in the state? What actions would you take as Attorney General to try to alleviate that problem?
Well, I think the right place for those types of investigations are the Attorney General's office. So in my history, I was an assistant Wayne County prosecutor at one point in my career. And so your local county prosecutors, generally speaking, do not have the resources to do a large-scale investigation with multiple victims and potentially a wide sweep of an investigation and then prosecution, like the Nassar case. So it should be judges, even though he's recused his office from it. That's a problem. So what I would have done if I thought there was a conflict, and I think there is, you go out to one of your county prosecutor's offices, like the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office or the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, and say, I would request that you give me 4 or 5 attorneys to help prosecute the Flint water crisis or the MSU crisis. And then what you pledge back to them is, I've got 4 or 5 assistant attorney generals who will come and do the work of Oakland County or Wayne County while your resources are out doing something else. Then you remove yourself from that. You're not wasting taxpayer money, and the job gets done. But I don't necessarily need to be in front of the camera every time that happens. And so I think that's the main difficulty I have with, for example, how the Flint water crisis was done. He should have brought in, actually, just basically, instead of a paid law firm for $5 million, you can go and do that under the same umbrella of bringing in a county prosecutor.
Very good. Look for one more question. I have one more question, and we'll do kind of concluding statements, then figure we do a picture. Anybody have one more question? Anybody burning question? No. Yes, John. All right.
You think that there should be term limits for congressmen?
No, I don't think so. I think that's solving the problem too far downriver, because ultimately I think it's more about how they're getting in office, and I think it's more about limiting money than that. Because I mean, in an ideal world, you want people in there for a long time that know everybody and know how things work. Because, I mean, that's kind of a puzzle too, right? I mean, Congress's approval rating right now, I think it's like 16% or something. Yet, the re-election rate on incumbents is 90%. I mean, that's more of a problem on voters have. Like, you guys, if you don't like them, don't vote for them. So.
I would say yes. I agree to the point that there is a level of institutional knowledge that you get from a role, right? And so you go in, you got to kind of figure out where's my office, like all that sort of stuff. But I think it's something where you look at it. I do believe that you get to a point where you become stale. And so we do need fresh faces, fresh people coming in. When you start talking about limits, like if we're talking about congressional seat, would it be 10 years, 12 years, 14? Like I think like Candace Miller, who was with us, I think she was there for 12 years. That was 12 or 14 years.
She was there for a while.
Yeah, and so but she left. I think kind of like at a point where it's like, okay, we need to mix this up a little bit and bring some fresh face and some new ideas to it. But again, I do believe there is some institutional knowledge, and so you have to have a decent amount of time. But I do believe that we should have term limits.
Mr. Graveline, do you want to answer that one, or I have one other question?
I'll throw my 2 cents in,
All right.
but if you want to see the effect of term limits, take a look at the Michigan legislature, and it's a wreck right now. I mean, it just is. I mean, you go up there, and I think it's 6 years in the House. I mean, the first 2 years you don't even know where anything is, where the bathroom is, let alone how to make legislation. And so just about the time you start getting the wherewithal to actually make legislation and meeting people, you're kicked out. Now you have to go look for your other job. I'm right with Cooper on this one. The fix I think is you fix the campaign finance, so you level the playing field, so the incumbent's not sitting on, I don't know, $6 million in their war chest to just bury everybody. But term limits have not worked in the state of Michigan. I mean, that legislature is a mess and has been a mess since we passed term limits.
All right, well, gentlemen, I really appreciate you guys coming out. Give us the elevator speech for kind of in conclusion, why vote independent, why vote for you guys in your respective races. We'll wrap it up. Who wants to go for it?
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll put it this way: if you're not pissed off, you're not paying attention. I mean, our political system is so damn rigged right now, not working for anybody, nobody's happy, and yet we keep running back and electing the same 2 parties. That's not going to do anything. I mean, the pendulum's going to go back and forth, nothing's ever going to change. It's really time, I think, for people to look for a new way forward that is, more moderate, more fact-based, and more about uniting people on the problems that affect us all as citizens and as Americans. I mean, because if you want to talk about campaign finance laws, gerrymandering, electoral laws, all of these things, I don't care who you are. Most of you probably agree on this. So let's get off of the divisive issues. I know people get fired up about abortion, guns, and immigration, but Congress isn't going to do anything on any of those. As Mr. Graveline mentioned, the Supreme Court acts on that. So stop looking for your legislators to save you. You can't count on one person to do it either. It's really, I think, time for a reawakening of people becoming citizens again, paying attention, knowing what's going on and understanding that this affects you, because this cannot go on forever. I'm only doing this now because I feel a deep sense of urgency that this path is not sustainable. I don't think the parties as they exist now are up to correcting that out of their own selfish interests. So I really think that there's that problem there. But I will say, though, that despite these dark, disturbing problems, I'm optimistic by a lot of the people I've met during this time, especially the younger generation, and just the support from people who've seen a lot more than I have. I think people are recognizing we need to do something differently. So if you're looking for that too, continue to do things like this. I think it's absolutely indispensable. It matters more than you think. It can feel powerless at times, but every single one of you, through your social media and your own personal networks, are an influencer, and just continue to take that ground. Refuse to give into tribalism, and just help each other out.
And just to kind of echo what he's saying, is I agree 100% with that, is that right now, if you actually believe that things are messed up, we need to fix things, we need to get back to civility and actually sitting down and talking with one another. It's not going to happen with the same 2 parties that have gotten us into this problem in the first place. They're paid off by their special interests. They have to push their interests. They're not even talking about what their community, nobody's talking about what they need for their communities. They're talking about whatever the money guys are behind them, and they're pushing those agendas. And we need to get back to representing our communities, representing our people. If we have our legislators are representing our communities again, it's going to change dramatically. It'll change overnight right there, because they know what those issues are. Because the issues that are taking place in District 10 are going to be different than Cooper's district versus Texas or California or somewhere else. And when you start representing your people's interests, all of a sudden people are like, wait, you know what, we're kind of grappling with the same issues. How do we come together? And all of a sudden the issues start bringing the people together versus the arguing like you're talking about.